I would like only to ask one question, which we can perhaps a little bit explore. Basically, to some extent, it's the question Juk was putting forward at the end of his talk, but I would frame it a little bit differently, and then open up to the audience. And I would like to start with an observation by Alexander Kluge about revolution. In revolutions, he is saying what happens is that the generation who revolts, the people who revolts, want to get rid of the baggage, all the historical baggage behind them, to clarify, so to say, the mental map in order to start really new. So revolutions as getting rid of baggage as an image, I think, is quite an interesting one to look at. And from this perspective, to look at the 20th century, what happens on the basis of the, let's say, the digital code, the success of the digital code, because when you look at from this perspective, one could say what Silicon Valley is doing with getting rid of content, getting rid of all this historical baggage, and concentrate really on the alphabet. And making the alphabet, so to say, the center strategy to transforming the world again. And what we listen to is what the implications of these are. And there are two questions related to that. The first one is, could that happen in the same way in the Chinese alphabet? Because the Chinese alphabet, as Juk was explaining, is very much more related to the cosmos, to the material world, to the world itself, than, let's say, the binary alphabet, which is a pure abstraction. So could this kind of world power, which was produced on the basis of pure abstraction and getting rid of content, getting rid of historical baggage, happen in the Chinese context in the same way? That would be just to give an illustration if that happens. That's the first question. The second question would be, we listened to the implications of applying alphabets to every aspect of life, including life itself, that just to take the metaphor, which is not a metaphor, which is very real at the same time, and that produces cancer, it produces illness, it produces sickness, because it's not complex enough to cover what life is, what we are living in. So on the basis of that, the second question would be, what could be the alternative in the situation we are in? Is a second enlightenment, meaning being reflexive to these processes we're talking about, good enough? Or do we need even more radical, practical alternatives, new ways of looking on all these processes than we did up to now? So that would be my two questions to the panel, and then we open up later on. And it would be great if each of one is in one way or the other reacting to that. Juk, you say? Yeah, you can stay, because the first was to you.
Yeah, I think, I think it is a very complex question, because in the 20th century, China was a full-up revolution. We have a revolution in 2011, not 2011, 1911. We have also the Cultural Revolution, and especially in the Cultural Revolution, that it produced what you said, or the concept of revolution that you have explained, was fully expressed in the Cultural Revolution, meaning how to get rid of tradition, how to embrace science, modern science and technology, and to to even to accelerate faster than Europe. So in this way, there is a kind of, we can say that a very narrow view of modernization. And this modernization is very much based on like applying what you said, the alphabet as the base to transform the world. And I think that this is also what we intuitively have when we think of technology. So technology is like the substance, the substrate that transforms culture and so on. But of course, what I was trying to say is that, if we talk about technology or we talk about writing, they're trying to avoid the reductionism, which we intuitively have, and to think of how to reframe the modern technology, which Heidegger called enframing. Now, what I propose, there are two ways of thinking about that. One way, where if I say systematically, one way is to think of the question of the episteme. And when I say episteme, it means if I can define it in this way, is the sensible condition under which knowledge is produced. So, for example, with Foucault, he analyzed from 16th century on, there are 3 epistemes in Europe. No? So by going back to the cosmogonical thinking in China is for me to rethink the question of the episteme, and now to think how can we put technology in a broader reality. So it's not that technology determines everything, but it has a reality in which it has to be coherent with.
Does that mean that that would be also a different kind of technology?
Yeah, so it is different understanding of technologies, or different relations to technologies, different forms of life. And the second question, the second way I was trying to raise is the question of epistemology, and which means how we know things. And I think in that they are capitalist epistemologies, no? They're capitalist epistemologies, and they are becoming dominating. And how can we introduce other forms of epistemologies? In a recent conference on AI, I was approached by a major company of Silicon Valley, who are people who are working on AI, who came to me and said, you know that in Silicon Valley, when we think of AI, we think of a God looking at everything, a God who knows everything. And he asked me, "What do you have alternatives to that? We want to work with you." Now, so I'm not saying that I'm going to work with them, but it's just an example to say that how limited it is, and even the people at the Silicon Valley know it's limited.
Well. I don't know whether this could be possible in other cultures. There is no doubt that our alphabetic culture has had on the alphabet rails to go very fast in knowledge. In particular, the scientific revolution is a revolution with the idea, the Cartesian mechanisms that are built out of elementary, simple components, like the alphabet. You cannot cut off the letters. You cannot use them anymore. They're elementary. They're very simple. They're atomistic, like Democritus understood immediately. That's really at the core of the Cartesian vision, and Galileo as well. You just compose those atoms, and then you get to complexity like the alphabet. By these rails, we did construct remarkable knowledge and fantastic machines. Our scientific revolution is a revolution of inventing machines. And first of all, guns. And with guns, we killed everybody else. That's been very effective.
Yeah, and the other question is so to say, the alphabet a technology which is too fast for us?
Well, I don't know whether it's too fast. I wouldn't have a reference system to say.
Translated in technology, of course.
But I would say that it gives a very partial reconstruction of the world, which is very effective because of this atomistic, but which is strongly incomplete exactly because of this atomistic vision. And we are hitting against a wall. Where? we have major difficulties understanding exactly atoms. Namely, quantum mechanics is not made out of simple and elementary components because of entanglement, because quanta are conceptually very complex, and again in biology, because the least component, elementary component, is not simple. The cell is very complex. So we really need to get out of our rails for thinking and producing machine, which is the alphabet, and, for example, interact with the culture, the Chinese one, where they always had an organismal understanding, first of all, of life.
Could one say, because of exactly these characteristics of the alphabet, to be discrete and to be finite, it has to be, and abstract by that too, it has to be reductionist. And because of this reductionism, it's so successful.
Well, it is successful for certain things, in particular constructing machine. Why? Because any artifact is constructed by taking elementary and simple components, and then you can make something very complex, like that machine, and immensely more complex. There's nothing to do, for example, with an organism. Embryogenesis, the formation of a fetus, is not made by composing, by screwing up a leg, by putting an eye in a hole. No, it's made out from an organism, a zygote, that differentiates, preserving at each step its organismal unity. By differentiation, by staying all the time as an organism, it produces organs as a result of a totally different process. So we are totally misled by thinking to organisms like machines. And this started again very clearly with the scientific revolution, which was incredibly productive for making machines, for making an excellent mathematical physics, incomplete. As I said, incomplete is not enough to understand even classical mechanics, even more as for quantum mechanics, but extremely effective because it's linked to this way of constructing machines. We've been champions, and I insist. The first machines we did, beginning with Leonardo, with his machine gun, were guns, and so this was, but now we are hitting against the wall for knowledge, because we have put, one of the elements I'm working on with my colleagues in biology, the issue of an endocrine disruptor, typical example of being able to invent new molecules by this atomistic perspective without an organismal view. We are really messing up the ecosystem. I don't refer to the other problems like warming of the atmosphere and so on. Just that issue is a major one. Cancer has been doubling in the last 40 years. The incidence of cancer has been doubling. And that's a consequence.
Instruments of observation.
Yeah, sure. But the incidence is doubling also because the death toll, with peak situations that did not exist before, and with the decrease of the beginning of cancers, of any kind of cancers. So medicine is having an increasing success in therapies, so you have the double of chances to getting out because of clinical experience. Clinical experience, technologies coming from outside, and so on. Surely not for knowledge. So that's a big issue where we should think of getting into different views. The other analogy I would like to make is this genocentric
May I
view.
just articulate this thought, which I think is very important of yours, that manipulating the genome on the basis of alphabetic reading produces a world which is completely different from the intention, so to say, articulated in improving the world. It's completely the opposite. Is that right?
Yes, the point is that manipulating the genome basically does not exist. I mean, there are only 5 GMOs, 5. Since 40 years, 50 years, laboratories have been producing thousands of GMOs, only 5 in the short-term work, which is very little. Since we decoded the DNA, not one monogenetic disease has been cured. We know 15 monogenetic, we know for certain. It's just one mutation. 20 cases have been cured, individual cases, and many of them fall sick again. Not one. So we are not able to manipulate it. They sell it all the time. And the GMOs, the only ones that did work, in the short term, they work. As I told you, they are making the zasta in the humus, in the microbiome of the roots. So also them don't work. Those stories about CRISPR and Cas9 that are called editing of DNA. Remarkable discovery. Really fantastic mechanism. Some colleagues in Germany understood how some viruses can modify the DNA, because they're RNA viruses, the DNA of some host cells. Fantastic. Now they've been able, in the States, to make this artificially. What we know is if you do that, it's a mess everywhere. There are plenty of a lot of other mutations. We have no idea how the organism is going to use it. So basically, we are not able to manipulate it. As Venter said,
but at the same time, whole businesses are developed around this idea.
Yeah, right. In 2000, in 2000, the leader of the American Cancer Biology Organization stated that by 2015, cancer would disappear. That in 2 or 3 years, we were going to make a diagnosis and prognosis by looking at DNA, 2 or 3 years. Today, the histologist with the light microscope is the only one who can say that if a cancer is benign, is malign, is metastasis. Metastasis is a caricature of the primary cancer. Is a primary cancer or not? I mean, that's been a total disaster. But they get a lot of money. Microsoft and IBM propose money to support the preparation of a research, a genocentric research in cancer biology. So it is not extra money for cancer biology. It's money to support the preparation for the application of a grant. This sets an incredible bias. We are in the situation of the geocentric system supported by the church in the 15th century. It's exactly the same paradigm, because if you look at the geocentric, it was common sense and metaphysics. Rome and the Pope had to be in the center of the universe, of course. I mean, that's clear. And this is the main motivation. So the gene has to be at the center of the organism by all means, by metaphysical choice. Then you do discover techniques. The geocentric approach was based on a fantastic geometry. I mean, the Arabs in particular contributed by spherical trigonometry, by inventing algebraic equations to solve problems in the epicycles, And it was effective because any finite number of points in an ellipsis can be interpolated by enough epicycles. The point is that it goes against the inertia principle, Galileo. So you radically change the perspective. We are back in the same situation with the same motivations. The geocentric approach was highly developed, in particular in the Arabic culture, but also in Europe, for prediction. So I didn't quote enough, but you find thousands of papers saying you will predict the school behavior, you will predict marital fidelity in scientific journals.
Oh, that's not easy. Lots of thoughts. I would have a question. If we speak in genetics about the alphabet, do you literally mean that it is not a metaphor? Or do you perhaps mean that the guiding idea in genetics is not the alphabet, but combinatorics? No? Separating something, combining something, and so on and so on. And in this case, it would be more the idea of digitality being the model of this kind of behavior than the alphabet in the literal sense.
Well, the point is that was the geocentric approach metaphorical? No, it was a metaphysical decision. So as for the alphabet, why the DNA, this fantastic, very important chemical physical trace of evolution, is not an alphabet? Because it is concrete material. There is no alternative to DNA but that specific chemical physical structure. Synthetic biology, all what they do is to take a fragment of the DNA of a bacterium and put it in another one, or construct exactly the same chemistry and replace a fragment in a bacterium, only bacteria, and exactly with the same chemical physical structure. So there is an intrinsic materiality. Biology is radical material. It's only made of that chemistry with that conformation, only this skin, this material, no alternative. The alphabet, the strength of the alphabet is to be independent from the material.
Okay. I will go back to a question of Bernd Scherer. What is the alternative to this abstractive principle of the alphabet. And I would answer to this question in 2 dimensions. The first, we have not to forget the sensitivity, the sensual aspects of the alphabet and the digitality, digits. You are doing something with your hands, with your fingers. The voice is returning by Siri and Alexa. We have to laugh about it, but it's an interesting phenomenon. There is not only the story of abstraction combined with the alphabet, but even the story of incorporation. Think about the zeros. Think about doing something with science. There's something happening between your hands and your eyes. This on the one side, but the other, and this is an answer to the question of enlightenment or ending of enlightenment or not. I think we can change models of business. And if we look to China in the negative example, we see a state has the power to dictate Google that they have to make their data transparent to the government. Well, think of Tim Berners-Lee, the creator of the World Wide Web. At the moment, he's construing a new platform, and in this platform, it is not the state wanting your data, but everybody has a storage, and all his traces of his net interaction are going to this individual storage, and you as an individual has to decide what to do with these traces, to give it as a kind of commercial economic activity or to delete it or whatever. And this idea going back to individual responsibility for the traces you leave by your interaction in the net, for me, is one of the most decisive dimensions of my idea of enlightenment. And enlightenment never ends. I told you there had never been an enlightened society because it is only a program, it is a collection of ideas. Some are wrong, we know it, absolutism of reasoning and so on, but some are very useful. And therefore, if we reflect on media and all this stuff, we had to remind that never a new media is in place of an old one. If there is a new media on the stage, the play transforms of the interaction of whole media. It is with orality. Orality is even beneath literacy, as we all know, and now we are looking that the voice is coming back in the epoch of digitality. And therefore, I think the rhetoric of ending of something is not a very good rhetoric if we are reflecting on media and their, so to say, influences on the ecology of mind and culture. Well, lots of... and to the fantasy of the Chinese letters, I've been in Beijing 4 weeks ago. I've never seen a society where so many people, young and old, in the elevator, wherever, is looking at their smartphones. And this is an interesting thing. Well, Chinese letters are something very different to the phonetic alphabet. But if we look at the behavior of using flat surfaces, inscribed surfaces, it's much more radical at the moment as in our society. Well, I
That's the last word.
No, I actually wanted to ask a question. It's a bit of a longish question, but I'll start.
No questions. Answers, please.
Only answers. Okay, so I give an answer. I think one of my favorite points, and we discussed that before as well, is that I think a lot of what we've been talking about today happens on a level that itself is not to be computed by the likes of us. and the revolutions we talk about, the changes we talk about, what to do differently, enlightenment, I somehow feel that there's a certain illusion, metaphysics of computation even within that. I mean, what we've heard today is that there is a culture that goes back 2,000, 3,000 years. And it starts with a certain form of alphanumerical, discrete alphabet. And it goes through a whole history of science, a whole history of our theory, through our enlightenment, through to these machines that we sit in front. And then we have these like thousands of years of culture. And then we say, all right, maybe we're on the wrong path. Shouldn't we change something? And I think that's no. I'm just, you know, no, I'm just, and that would have been my question that I'm coming to now. Whether there shouldn't be a difference somehow. There's certain forms we can't escape. Within our science, we base it on computation these days. We base it on these mathematical models. We base it on all that. So I absolutely agree that there are things we can change, but are they really on the level of culture, as I would call that, or this global structure, or are they more on a level that is social, that is society? Can't we do much more with the surface effects? Because these other effects produce us, but we don't produce them.